All right, today I'm going to be showing you guys the best settings for Apex in Season 22. We'll start off with gameplay. So interact prompt style I have on compact just because default takes up more space. So you're going to, interact with any item, there's just this giant UI element on your screen. But if you use compact, it's not going to be there. And that can be, the difference of seeing an enemy and not. Button hints I have on, it doesn't really matter, to be honest. Crosshair damage feedback is entirely up to you. I like the X because it's satisfying to see. That's about it. On or off doesn't matter. Off is obviously going to take up less on your screen. Damage numbers I'd recommend to always have on stacking. I know some people use floating or even both, but I'd recommend just keeping it on stacking. Enemy health bar, you obviously want to have this on because if you're shooting an enemy at basically any range, you're going to be able to see their health bar. And that makes it very easy to track the enemy. The ping opacity I have on faded, but if you have problems seeing pings, I would just leave it on default then. The faded opacity. And here's the default opacity. So it makes a pretty big difference. But if you have problems seeing the pings, I would just leave it on default. But if it's honestly getting in your way, like for me, I would recommend putting it on faded. Enemy highlight, you're going to want to leave on for sure. So it will highlight enemies like this, up to 5 enemies within 30 meters. Obituaries, obviously you want to have this on. It's the kill feed. Minimap rotation is preference, but I find on, it's a lot easier to keep track of where you are in relation to the map, the 3D map and the 2D map. So weapon auto cycle on empty, you're going to want to have this on. Plus there's going to be more delay when you're not using auto sprint if you aren't already holding shift as you press W. Auto run I have off. Jetpack control I have on hold. Toggle is awful. I mean, I don't even play Valk anyways. Incoming damage feedback is on 3D. This is preference as well. Taking damage closes death box or crafting menu. You definitely want to have this off. You do not want to be going for a swap and then you get shot and then it kicks you out of the menu and then you die because you don't get the swap. That's like the worst thing ever. Off-screen portraits. So this is basically going to show a UI element of your teammates on the edge of the screen if they are off-screen. So if you have problems keeping track of where your teammates are, I would recommend turning it on. If not, I would leave it off because, again, it's more UI that's going to be on your screen. So we want to reduce that as much as possible without it being a detriment to the game. Hop-up, pop-up, you obviously want this on. Usage sharing, I have off. Performance display I have on, which it just shows your FPS in the top right and your ping. It's not that important, but it's, nice to see if, you're having any performance issues or packet loss or anything of the sort, you will be able to tell there. Communication filter I have on everybody. Obviously, if you don't want to talk to anybody or hear them, you can just put it on nobody. I'm using 100, 255, 100. My laser sight is the same. I don't use colorblind mode. I don't use subtitles. Mouse and keyboard settings. So sensitivity obviously is going to vary per player, but I do not use any per optic sensitivity. I'd recommend just leaving it. Some people do prefer this. Mouse acceleration, you want this off. Invert, obviously it varies per player. Plant mouse cursor to game window. This is a very good setting. If you're looting a death box, you will not be able to click onto your other monitor. A lot of people don't know that this is here, actually, and it's probably one of the best settings in the game that they've added recently. Lighting effects I have off. I don't want any extra services running in the background as much as possible. We have pretty standard keybinds here. I have tap, strafe on scroll up, jump on C. A lot of people ask about that. I just prefer it to be on C. And I prefer my crouch hold to be on space. Some people don't bind toggle crouch, but you actually want to do that because if you're interacting with something where you're unable to move, the only thing you can do is toggle crouch or jump. So those are the two options. But survival item I have on G. My nades are on F. Holster weapon is on X. I use 3 and 4 for my weapons because I don't really care to hit 1 and 2. I use hold ADS. Toggle is going to introduce delay. Anytime you use anything that has to do with toggling, there is going to be a delay unless it's a UI element. I have heels on my mouse. I just prefer them to be there. I don't use anything else on my mouse anyways, other than, jumping and tap strafing. So I can, maintain as much as my hand being used for movement as possible. My character utility action is on H. I just press this with my thumb. And then I also have inspect on my mouse. And it should be on in as well. I press with my thumb. I don't honestly inspect much anymore anyways. It's just, it gets old just spamming inspect for no reason. I have my ping on 1 and my legend upgrade on 2. And that is it for the mouse and keyboard section. Now for controller. So I actually play mouse and keyboard and controller. This is my button layout. I use my right stick click for jump, left stick click for crouch, aim with bumpers. This is just a lot faster, basically. I don't care for triggers. I never have. They're not nearly as responsive as a actual button that clicks. I have sprint up on the D-pad because I use auto sprint, so I don't need that on my joysticks at all. That's just a waste of a bind. I use B for melee, and I use A for healing. Healing is normally on the D-pad, but I play claw, so that's why I have it there. I have my stick layout on default. My interact reload button is tap to use and reload. My crouch button is hold. Aim button is also hold. Again, toggle introduces delay. You want to be using as hold as much as you can. Survival slot I have on. I don't care about spamming my heirloom. I just want my game to be as functional as possible, so I'm going to have that on. Adaptive triggers, I have this off. Trigger dead zone, I have it off as well. If you have problems with trigger dead zones, you're going to want to turn it up to default. I would not recommend turning it anything higher than that unless you really squeeze your controller. My cursor speed, it's almost max. For armor swapping, you want it as fast as possible. My per optic settings, I have off. Again, I don't use these even on controller. My response curve is linear. My look dead zone is none. Movement dead zone is small. So the reason why you want to be using linear, some people play classic, and I understand it, but linear is the optimal setting. Same with no dead zone. You do not want any dead zone at all. You want a slight drift. That means your controller will be a lot more responsive. So these are my ALCs. So I play ALC sometimes, not that often, but I would be playing on 500, 500, 130, and 85. Everything is off. The reason why is you don't want any ramp up. You want your stick to be as responsive as possible. Some controllers have issues with having this high of a sensitivity. It will actually skip. So if you're getting any skipping on controller and you play ALCs on high sense, this is probably why. So I would just recommend turning it down a bit. If it's a bit too fast for you or twitchy towards the center of your stick, like you are unable to make fine adjustments, then you would want to change this value. I find 0 to be the best, 0 to 4. Anything higher than that, I think it's a bit too much. It's kind of getting into the classic feel settings. Obviously, aim assist on, duh. These are my main controller settings for when I'm like actually playing the game. These are for just playing movement basically on controller and, pubs or whatever. The thing about no dead zone and playing on linear, you're going to have the most aim assist you possibly can have. Your controller is going to be as reactive as possible. You want to be able to move your controller in a really, really tiny circle like this. If you are unable to do that, it's either because you have a dead zone or, well, a software dead zone or a hardware dead zone. If you have a hardware dead zone, you're just going to have to get a different controller. There's not really anything you can do. But if it is a software dead zone or set in the game, you can change that via your controller software, and you're going to want to set it on 0. All right, so now we're in the video tab. So display mode, full screen. Aspect ratio is 16:9. Sometimes I will play 16:10. It just depends how I'm feeling. I typically stay on native, and the reason why is because while stretched looks nice, the thing about native is you have more pixels on your screen, so you technically have more accuracy. When you take away pixels, you're basically increasing your margin of error for aiming. Brightness I have on 50. Field of view I have 110. Sometimes I play on 120, which I will show you how to do that. But typically I stay on 110 because that's just what the max is. I'm sure that they'll add 120 in the actual game at some point. FOV ability scaling I've disabled. If you have it enabled and you play something like Octane, when you queue, your field of view is going to go from whatever field of view to 120 instantly, and it's awful. I have 100% turned this off. It's going to make you inconsistent because you don't want to be aiming at different field of views as much as you possibly can. Sprint view shake I have on minimal. You don't want your screen bouncing around. There's no reason to ever have this on normal, ever. VSync I have disabled. NVIDIA Reflex I have enabled plus boost. Some people find that off or enabled feels better. You're just gonna have to test and figure it out. I find enabled plus boost to give me a slightly less amount of FPS, but it feels a lot more responsive and lower latency. Adaptive resolution, 0. We don't want our screen changing quality. Anti-aliasing, we don't want our game to be blurry, so we're gonna put that on none. You'll see some jagged edges. If you can't handle it, then turn it on. My texture streaming budget is 2 to 3. Basically, when you put this on 2, it doesn't really make a big difference from 2 to 8. So I've heard that 8 has less latency, and I've also heard that 2 to 3 has less latency. It doesn't really matter as long as you are fine with the way that the game looks. If you want the absolute lowest frame timing and the best performance, though, you're going to want to set this to none. It's going to look like Play-Doh, but it is technically the best. I just don't like the way that it looks. I think Apex is a good-looking game, so I'd, keep it on a setting to where the textures are actually showing. The texture filtering is bilinear. Ambient occlusion quality I have disabled. Sun shadow coverage is low, disabled. You don't really want that many shadows. If you were to turn any of these on, I would say the spot shadow detail, because let's say someone's going up a zip line, right? You can actually see that from the sun shadow. You would not be able to see it if you have it disabled, right? Like, let's say they're going up a zip line behind you, right? And the shadow's being cast in front of you. You would see them actually going up the zip line. Again, like a balloon, for example. Volumetric lighting, I have disabled. Dynamic spot shadows, I have disabled. Again, we don't want all this extra, like, graphics unless you prefer it. Again, I just prefer performance, so there's going to be one setting that I do have on, the highest setting, which is just model detail. And then we have model detail is very high. So it says it controls how detailed, right? But it actually is referring to the distance, so the LODs. The reason why I have it on very high is because I don't like the grass flickering. If you guys are not playing on if you're playing on the lowest setting, the grass and stuff will flicker. And I just think it looks terrible. It's very distracting. There's pretty much like no reason to have it on a lower setting unless your PC cannot handle it. Map details, so this is also another new setting. If you turn this on, the map is going to have a lot more detail, like these little rocks and like decals. So competitively, you would want to turn this off, but again, I think Apex is a really good-looking game, so if you leave it on, I mean, you're not really going to notice a performance difference unless you're on a lower-end system, potentially, so it doesn't really matter to me if it's on or not, but again, it's just preference. It's going to look, just a little tiny bit of eye candy, basically, around the map, like, for example, these shells. If we turn them off, they're not going to be there anymore. Same with, the decal, the rocks on the ground. Effect details, we have this on low. Thermites can drop FPS. like crazy. Grenades, fuse. Wait, we just want to keep all that on low. Horizon, all that stuff. You don't want that dropping your FPS or your frame timing. So as much as possible. I know a lot of abilities in the game still drop, well, increase frame timing, excuse me. Impact marks disabled. There's basically no reason unless you're in the firing range testing, but even then you can just go to custom range and then you can turn on hit markers if you need to do that, and then you'll be able to see them. Ragdolls I have on low. Again, I don't pay attention to the body unless it's like absurdly bouncing around or something and you just so happen to see it. It's funny. But audio settings. So this is where my settings are going to be different than most people. Obviously, master volume is going to depend. Don't blow your ears out. You want to have the game quieter. You don't want to ruin your ears. Device, you're just going to want to set to your system default or whatever device that you're using from this list. So this is another new setting. Well, I think it's a few seasons old, but we're actually able to change our surround sound through the game rather than having to edit it in the files now. So I would play with this setting. I will show my mixer settings and how to set it up the way that I have it. I personally have been using 7.1. The thing is usually, right, I would say use stereo, but due to the configuration I'm using now, I would actually say use 7.1 if you're going to follow my in-depth audio settings, which I feel like are much better than the stock or stereo. Your voice chat, obviously, you want to just pick whatever mic you're using. Push to talk. Open mic threshold. If your mic is very loud, I would recommend turning this up so your randoms don't insta-mute you. So I have the dialogue turned down to 40 just because I don't want to really hear talking. I would even maybe turn it down to something like 30. Especially sometimes the voice lines can just be unnecessarily loud. This is another new setting. It's gameplay, volume, and spectating. So when you die, you don't have to have the game be all loud. If you do a lot of spectating, then you can turn it down. Just get annoyed by the spectating audio because it can be louder actually. So it's nice that they gave us a slider for that. I actually turn this off. This is another new setting. Sound and background. Again, if I tab out, I'm probably doing something else other than playing the game, so I'm not going to want to hear it. Okay, so now we're going to get into my audio mixer settings. So you can actually do this. This is a virtual mixer. You can use this with absolutely anything. So you can route your game. So this is my game here. I have it turned down a little bit. We'll put a link in the description to download the software. It's amazing. I actually was using it before I even got my SteelSeries keyboard for this reason specifically. You can use this with any headset. I'm using Bose Sound Sports, the old wired ones. So you can use this with anything, and you can route, different audio through different sources and control them in a lot of different ways through the software. I've been looking for an alternative to Voicemeeter for a very long time, and this is by far the best one I have found. So this is my Apex Legends profile. I have selected the default Apex Legends profile here, and I've changed it just slightly. So obviously it's going to depend on what you're using. You're going to want to tweak this yourself, but I have, hello Beanie, I have a cat on my desk. So basically I turned everything down by 1.1 decibels because it was a bit loud and sharp. What this does is it removes the very bassy sounds throughout the game. So if you have, the ambient sounds in the background, for example, in Apex, we all know about those, right? This is going to reduce that a lot, and it's going to take the bassy sound away from those, and you're only going to be hearing the mids and highs. Again, I would tweak this yourself, but just play around with it and, find out what settings that you like the best. Spatial audio, I have this turned off. Volume boost. I don't want to blow my ears out. My computer's loud enough. I don't need that. This basically is going to raise or lower. It's kind of like compression, but it's not. It's kind of like a gate for how loud your game is allowed to be, even if you turn up the game. So you can essentially turn up the game and then turn down the louder sounds. Again, you're gonna have to play with these values and find out what's best for your setup, but this helps so much. Actually, it's insane. This is probably the singular best audio setting I have found for Apex. You want to go to local disk, you want to go to users, you want to click on your user, and then you want to go to saved games, respawn, Apex, local, and then video config. You want to open this up in Notepad. So I'm going to show you the most optimal settings for FPS. I personally don't use them because I don't need them. So you're going to want to switch the LOD switch scale to 0. So that setting I was talking about earlier in game, the model detail. So normally this, I believe, would be on 0.6. So I have it on 2 because, you know, my setting is very high in game. But you would want to put this on 0 if you want the, you know, lowest setting possible. And so here you're not going to want to mess with these frame timing settings. I've seen people say that this helps your FPS, but it does not. It only helps if you're using adaptive resolution, which actually is not in the game anymore. So now this definitely does nothing. Maybe you can still turn it on through one of these settings. I have not tested that. I don't use it. So CSM enabled, coverage and cascade res. So these are the shadows. Again, if you want to put these on 0, it does make the game a bit more clear. Again, I personally don't use these because I don't need to anymore, and I don't mind the way it looks by default, but if you do, that's definitely going to help you get some extra performance out of your game. New shadow settings. Again, if you want the maximum performance, you're going to set this to 0 as well. You just want to exit out, right-click, properties, read only, and then apply. And if you would like to use 120 field of view, you want to find this line here, field of view scale. It's default 1.55. If you want it to be the max possible, you can use 1.8. Once again, once you're done with this, you just file, save, exit, and to save the settings to make sure they don't change, you just hit read only, hit apply. If you change any of your in-game settings, it will change these settings until you relaunch the game unless you do not have properties read-only checked. If you have it unchecked, that means it's going to write to the file and change the actual file settings, which you don't want to happen if you are trying to use these optimizations. And finally, we have some properties here on Apex. You know, Steam, you can do this on EA Desktop as well. I would recommend using Steam. I am not a fan of EA Desktop. It's very, very laggy for me. Any performance issues and you're playing on EA, I would recommend trying Steam, turning off the overlay, and so you can cap your FPS to whatever you want. Currently, I'm just testing 156, but I would normally play at 234. And the reason why is I cap 6 lower than my refresh rate to reduce tearing. It completely gets rid of the tearing for me. If it doesn't for you, you can either cap anywhere from like 3 to 6 below or 3 to 6 higher. You can try those, or even, you know, capping directly on the refresh rate. Sometimes, you know, you just got to play with those settings and you will reduce tearing. Novid on because I don't like to hear the game blow my ears out when I launch it. The last setting, so this I have been testing on and off. I still can't tell which one's better, to be honest. A lot of people make claims that DX12 is better, but I find that it seems to be very inconsistent. Sometimes it seems like it's better, other times it doesn't. So you can play with this setting, figure it out. And then you just want to go to installed files here, hit browse. So here is the DX12 and here's the 11. So on both of these, you just want to do the same thing, right click, properties, compatibility. You want to disable full screen optimizations, change high DPI, override high DPI by application, okay, apply. That is my settings guide for Apex Legends. If you have any questions, just feel free to ask in the comments. I appreciate you guys watching. If you guys are interested in a movement guide, let me know. I've been beginning to work on that. And yeah, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video.